For the last 40 years or so, the entire world economy ran on one really simple idea. Well, that idea, it's dead. We're living through a massive economic shift, a fundamental rewiring of how basically everything is made and moved. Today, we're diving into the Great Unravelling. Okay, let's get right into it. The entire global system is changing its core mission. See, for decades, the whole name of the game was maximum efficiency, making things as cheaply as possible, even if it meant the system was, built on a house of cards. But now, the goal is maximum resilience, making sure you can still get what you need, even when the world gets messy. And this one shift from efficiency to resilience, well, it's the key to understanding everything that's happening right now. All right, so to really get where we're headed, we've got to look back at where we came from. Let's talk about the old global factory and how this idea of single-source globalization became the undisputed king for so long. The old system was surprisingly simple when you think about it. For decades, the entire global supply chain pretty much revolved around just one thing: finding the absolute lowest labor cost possible. If a country offered the cheapest pair of hands, that's where the world's factories went. And this created these massive centralized hubs, China being the biggest, of course, that basically acted as the planet's workshop. The whole thing was built on the idea that this was the most efficient way to operate, period. Yeah, but all that efficiency, it came with a huge hidden price tag: fragility. And starting around 2020, a perfect storm of crises started to hit, one right after another, and it exposed all the fatal flaws that were hiding in plain sight the whole time. So this breakdown, it happened in stages. First up, the pandemic in 2020. That was a real wake-up call, wasn't it? It showed us that relying on just one supplier thousands of miles away was a massive gamble. One factory shuts down and poof, shelves go empty on the other side of the world. Then came regional conflicts, which proved this wasn't just an economic risk, it was a straight-up threat to national security. And finally, the shipping crisis hit, and the very foundation of the old model, cheap, easy transportation, just crumbled. And the financial shock? Whoa. It was huge. All of a sudden, the cost to move a single container just skyrocketed. We're talking a six-fold increase in some cases. All those hidden costs of doing business across the globe, things like delays and intellectual property theft, they were suddenly right there in your face, impossible to ignore. The era of cheap shipping was officially over. So naturally, this forced a complete 180 in strategy. We went from a world of just-in-time manufacturing, that super efficient system where parts arrive exactly when they're needed, to just-in-case. The top priority was no longer about cutting inventory to zero for maximum efficiency. It was about having enough stuff on hand to survive the next inevitable crisis. Resilience, all of a sudden, was way more valuable than raw efficiency. And here's the really crucial part. This wasn't just a problem for CEOs anymore. Suddenly, it was a national security issue. And the political reaction was swift and, frankly, pretty brutal. Nations started building what you could call economic fortresses, actively trying to design each other out of their most critical supply chains. And this strategy, it has a name: geopolitical fortressing. Basically, it's the idea that if you want to be secure, you have to control your own destiny. And that means using every tool in the toolbox. We're talking tariffs, massive subsidies, and even this idea of friendshoring, where you only trade with countries you trust, all to protect yourself from being held hostage. And believe me, these policies were not subtle. Just look at the US Liberation Day tariffs from 2025. You had a baseline of 10% on most imports, but a whopping 104% on goods from China. That wasn't just a little trade tweak. It was a giant blinking sign saying, move your factory somewhere else. And tariffs were just one piece of the puzzle. Governments started pouring billions into domestic subsidies, things like the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. The whole point was to build up national champions, strong domestic companies that could compete on the world stage, and to lock in these new, safer supply chains with friendly countries. At the end of the day, bringing factories home wasn't just a good idea, it was a matter of survival. But here's the thing. All the political will in the world doesn't matter if the economics don't work, right? You can want something all day, but if the numbers don't add up, it's not going to happen. And that's where technology swooped in and completely changed the equation, with something called the automation equalizer. Which brings us to the big, multi-trillion-dollar question, right? For decades, the answer was always a hard no. How could a worker in a high-wage country ever compete on costs with cheap labor from overseas? Well, the answer turned out to be simple. You don't compete with cheap labor, you make it irrelevant. The automation equalizer just flipped the whole board over. Technologies like advanced robotics, AI, and 3D printing meant that the competitive advantage was no longer about having cheap human hands. It was about having smart physical capital, the machines themselves.
And just to give you a sense of the scale here, get this, just one of these 3D printing service bureaus can crank out 600,000 working parts in a single week. A job that used to take a giant factory and a globe-spanning supply chain can now be done locally, on demand, and at an absolutely incredible speed. And what this creates is a totally new way of doing things, distributed manufacturing. So instead of one giant factory supplying the whole world, now you have a network of smaller, localized micro-factories. They're decentralized, they're digitally connected, and they're right there, close to the people who are actually buying the stuff. Okay, so let's bring this all home. What does the Great Unraveling actually mean for you and me? Because this isn't just some abstract story about economics. It directly impacts our jobs, the things we buy, and the places we live. Well, this is the new reality we're living in. It means new kinds of jobs, high-tech jobs for a whole new generation of domestic industrialists who know how to run these advanced machines. It also means different products. Now, are things going to be a bit more expensive? Yeah, probably. But they're also going to be more durable and locally made. And there's a huge environmental bonus. By cutting out thousands of miles of shipping, these new local supply chains can be up to 25% less polluting. You know, there's a quote that just nails this whole shift perfectly. The pendulum that swung towards offshoring for 40 years has finally swung back. We have made a conscious choice to trade the cheap, disposable efficiency of a fragile world for the security and durability of a resilient one. The future isn't being shipped from halfway around the planet anymore. It's being built, it's being printed right here in our own backyards.